Okay, well, welcome to the panel, everyone. We're going to be speaking about new trends in financial data today. I've got 4 panelists here. It's a bit of a stacked panel here. So I've got Kieran Kennedy, who is SVP of Strategic Partnerships and Alliances at FactSet. We've got Matt Glickman, who is VP. This is the longest title I've ever seen, Matt. So VP Customer Product Strategy. This could go on for some while. Data Marketplace Financial Services at Snowflake. Tim Baker, Head of IEX Cloud, and then we've also got Alex Golbin, the Chief Data Officer from Morningstar. So what I wanted to do today is really dig into a little bit about some of the issues that we've had over the years in financial technology and specifically around financial data and how some of those things are being solved. If we actually look back and ask the question, how hard was financial data a decade ago? There's a reason I've got a shaved head, so I can't pull out my hair. Matt also joined me in that sort of process. So what we're going to talk about is more specifically financial data and how there's been a shift in the marketplace from financial data often being the Achilles heel to innovation to now actually being at the epicenter of innovation. So there's been this dramatic shift. And what I wanted to focus on today with the panelists are really 3 different topics. And these are 3 topics that have been really held me back over the years in innovating. So the first one is just the data explosion. How do you actually keep up with more and more different data vendors? And this has really got to the point, or been exacerbated most recently with alternative data vendors. We see so many alternative data vendors popping up all over the shop. How is a firm actually supposed to keep up with all those and actually prioritize which ones they should be working with? Concordance. Now, concordance is a very unusual word. I'm going to say, unless you've actually worked in financial data, you have no idea what I'm talking about. But basically, concordance is connecting disparate sets of data together. How do we actually combine everything in our data lakes and make it work sufficiently? And then the final issue, which I think a lot of people really overlook, is the deployment issue. So what we're really going to do is dig into each one of these topics and get some thoughts from all of these leading thought leaders in the industry and really delve down with what's going to be happening next in the financial market data space. So with that, I'll turn my attention to the data explosion. So over the last year, as I mentioned before, we've seen a massive growth in not only the number of data vendors, but also the quantum of data. What can I actually do? We've seen a shift from structured data to unstructured data also. So what we think about as data, we often think of a share price chart or something like that. That's not the world that we live in today. We've got so much data that's available to us. So Kieran, I'd really like to throw out a question to you. Often these new data vendors are just popping up very, very quickly. They've got some valuable data sets, but how is a sell side or a buy side firm really supposed to keep up to date with all these new emerging firms? And then also as a secondary question, what do you see the role of the major data vendors like FactSet in actually helping out the sell side and the buy side in this process?
Yeah, thank you, Adrian, and happy to be here. I think from, we have seen, obviously we've seen the same thing in the explosion. And I think one of the keys on how to approach this is that you have to expose your content in a multitude of ways, and making it easier to ingest is critical to that. So what we do is, and I think it used to be that in order to get a unique set of content, you had to be in that specific platform or ecosystem. And that's changed. That's no longer appropriate. If you want to expose your content, you have to think about it not only on your platform or ecosystem, but you have to think about it outside that and how you can expose that, whether that be in the cloud, in CRM. It's much different than, okay, I'm going to spin up a data set and then I also have to spin up an application around it. That's no longer the case. It's how do I leverage other tools and open flexible technologies so that people can get access to that. And then the way that we think about the role of the major data vendor is, I was actually reading something recently and it said that 50 to 80% of a typical data scientist's day-to-day activity really consists of wrangling and cleaning data rather than actually, analyzing and modeling and visualizing. And that's where, we think about it from, there's really sort of 4 components to it, to a major, to a data vendor. One is meeting clients where they are. So whether that's in the cloud, whether that's in CRM, as I said, whether that's in a BI tool. So, you know, we used to aspire that everyone's going to get everything through my workstation, and that's no longer the case. You have to think about a much broader audience. The second thing you have to do is you have to provide the tools to make it easy to evaluate and ingest. Again, going back to that statistic about the time take, and that's when, when we think about working with partners like Snowflake, it solves that ETL part, right? It gets to that ease of ingestion and access. And then the last real piece is connecting those relevant data sets. And that's I saw you, Adrian, when you talked about concordance, you made this motion when it really should be that motion. It's how do you really connect those two?
Well, thanks for picking me up on that one.
I just thought I'd call that out.
So I'm sure everyone will appreciate making fun of me, but there we go. You've recently joined IX Cloud from Refinitiv, or relatively recently. You've obviously gone to IX Cloud with some hypotheses in mind. Can you, just share with us your thoughts on how you think data vendors and also aggregators are going to evolve over the coming years to take advantage of this market trend?
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. So I think the first thing is, for the first time, certainly in my experience, there are a lot more horses in the race now. You've got the incumbents, the large aggregators, which are really the cash cows, and by virtue of their size are quite slow moving, which makes it hard for them to respond to those changing customer needs. That said, they're moving their propositions into the cloud and improving the way that they deliver the data in line with those clients shifting to the cloud. But they all struggle with the same speed to onboard new content, especially a lot of the alternative data sets that you mentioned. They tend to be messier, they need a lot more work, and frankly, the economics don't always work, at least immediately, for those big vendors where you maybe only have 20 or 30 customers that can afford to buy those more esoteric data sets. And then you've got the new entrants. These are the new independent data providers, and also obviously some new aggregators as well, including IEX Cloud. The new aggregators are much more agile. We have no tech debt. We're built entirely on GCP, so we can scale. And I think generally those, we're all taking advantage of the fact that AI and machine learning has made that data, including that unstructured data, much more accessible. You no longer have to have thousands of people in India or offshore processing lots of documents manually. You can train a system to do that. So in the new aggregator bucket, I'd also include the alt data aggregators, more specialized firms like Battlefin and Eagle Alpha and Noidata. And these firms are all helping clients innovate faster. To Kieran's point, test the data, see the data, try it before they buy it. And then you've got the cloud vendors. I've got to be careful. We've got Matt on the call here, but they're all getting involved, which is great. Although they really care about making sure that wherever or however the data is shipped, it ends up in their storage and running their compute. And that's kind of why they're building marketplaces, to act as a kind of gravitational pull for customers. Now, these firms don't always have the SMEs that maybe the big firms have, although Matt's definitely an SME, ex-Golbin. So only, I think, the more sophisticated customers who can, tap into these marketplaces. It's a bit like, in the US, small mom and pop store vendors will go to Costco. They'll buy the bulk data, but they'll still have to unpack it and do some work on it. But I think as data as a service matures, that's going to change. But at the end of the day, the net winner is the client, because they're going to have a lot more choice as to where they can consume the data and, frankly, how much they pay for it.
Great. So in that discussion, you mentioned something that sort of really resonated with me around, you alluded to concordance, which I now know I have to actually do that for. Concordance, Kieran, could you just speak to a little bit around the role of innovation, AI, ML, in actually solving some of our concordance issues, and how you've actually seen that not only change over the last couple of years, but also how that's actually manifested itself in the OpenFin FactSet initiative?
Yeah, I mean, I love this topic because it's such a intractable problem, right? It's such a challenge, and it used to be that when I think about it, we've been at FactSet we've been concording content for 40 years. If we look back at what we did, I mean, we didn't own any of the data we had. We didn't create any of our data, so we had to stitch it together. And the stitching used to be ticker to seed all, seed all to ticker, seed all to ISIN, and that was pretty straightforward. That was just two tables looking at each other. Now you interact the alt data in there, and now you're trying to connect with a product name. You're trying to connect with a bill of lading, and that's where we've had to deploy a number of different tools, and we use a lot of AI and ML in that focus, because you've got to go. It's a mosaic now, and how you concord. And when you think about an entity, it's not just the public company that trades on an exchange. It's the subsidiaries, it's the privates, and it's their trade names and those things that you have to link back. So, and that's something that when we think about the Open FactSet platform, is there's the part of that the Open FactSet platform makes the data accessible and people can find the data. But then the third thing we layer on top of that is stitching that together, because that's when the value comes out. It's great to have satellite images of Teslas coming off the Fremont factory, but if you can't connect that to their future earnings or what they think they're going to sell, it's not much use.
And Alex, you've had an interesting career. You've spent a decade and a half or so sort of on the buy side, but interestingly, your position in the buy side was also a vendor in many respects with Aladdin. And then more recently, you're at Morningstar. Can you put together the two different perspectives, and also how you've seen this marketplace or issues around concordance evolve for us?
Yeah, certainly, Adrian. And from my perspective, the complexity is not really, from what I've seen, is around the tools and machine learning. The complexity is really understanding what is the data you're looking at, and what are concordance issues in the first place. Just as an example, things may actually look perfectly normal, like something, and there are a couple of typical problems. One is something is called the same thing and it looks like the same thing, like country. But then unless you dig in and realize that in some cases, country of incorporation, in some cases it's country of domicile, in some cases country of risk, they have very different economic value, but to a machine, to a program, it actually looks like they're all countries. Or it could be something that's called totally different things, but actually mean the same thing, like sector breakdown, industries classification, any other sort of breakdown. They usually mean the same thing. For a portfolio manager, they're synonymous, but for a machine, that could actually be two different things. Or perhaps things like, you're getting a pricing feed and you assume a price is a price, and you don't really realize that in some cases could be a 3 p.m. snap, in some cases could be a 4 p.m. snap, it could be like a dirty versus clean. So from my experience, it's really a combination of, historically, what people used to do is just really use some sort of user interface and map those data fields, data set to data set, very laborious and required a great deal of subject matter expertise. You really needed to understand and spend a lot of time with the vendor to understand what is that they're providing you with. So with some of the machine learning tools, I think it's getting easier to at least recommend some of the matches and some of the differences. But ultimately, I don't think there is a way around deep subject matter expert. It's just making those subject matter experts much more efficient to do that mapping. But I haven't seen, either on the buy side or sell side, I actually spent quite a few years at Lehman as fixed income researcher, also building and providing research. And it's the same thing. Unless you really know what sits underneath those values, it's very hard to just automatically map things. And that's where things that normally look perfectly in sync will end up generating signals that are nonsensical.
Yeah. Now, Tim, as I mentioned before, you've just recently come to IAX Cloud, and one of the beautiful things about that is you walk into an office and there is a whiteboard and there's nothing written on it. What I mean by that, there's no tech debt, there's no constraints, and you can take the previous pain that you've experienced and actually incorporate that into what you drew on the whiteboard. So can you tell us, a little bit how that sort of whiteboard approach, sort of impacted your strategy at IXCloud?
Yeah, sure. And I think you're right, Adrian. It goes back to years of painful past experience. I suppose I was involved in opening up Refinitiv's identifier PermID, and I'm glad to see that it's used alongside Figgy and some of the other open identifiers to help start to solve for the problem. And it was interesting just listening to Alex. There's some really good examples of the challenges, and I can't resist mentioning the Snowflake example. So Snowflake, as we know, listed very successfully a few weeks ago, and massive valuation. Well done, Matt. Snow was the ticker, SNOW, and across Wall Street, systems started to fail. And that was because Snow, only 3 years ago, was the ticker of another company also listed on the New York Stock Exchange. And actually, you go back to 2010, there was another company also listed on the New York Stock Exchange that had the same ticker. There's a company with the ticker Snow in Holland. So I think really having that painful past experience, and as soon as you get into corporate actions and the complexity of how companies change, it gets very hard. Now, I think, back to your analogy of the whiteboard, I wish I could use a whiteboard now, but we're all remote. But, I think to an extent, you end up throwing a certain amount of mud at the whiteboard because you have to figure out how to manage through what essentially is a pretty flawed system. Allowing the exchanges to remint the same identifier is one of probably a dozen things that the industry should just clean up, because downstream, it creates all kinds of issues. But we are spending time, literally right now, thinking about how to better model the data. And that's not just the symbology of securities, it's companies, it's regions. And of course, one of the other challenges there is that a lot of that symbology is locked up behind quite expensive licenses. Now, we're lucky enough to be able to afford, at least some of those licenses. But, we're also going to be resting a lot on the open identifiers like the LEI and the PermID and the Figgy. But it is still quite an effort to stitch that stuff together and then obviously expose that to customer, because ultimately, the goal here is to allow customers to hit our API and be delivered the data they expect. And that's, at the end of the day, there's a lot of effort goes behind that to make sure you're getting the right bond, or you're getting the right equity price, or the right country or sector. So yes, starting from scratch helps, but it doesn't solve all the industry problems, unfortunately.
Yeah. Now, another problem that we often see is what I think of as the last mile, the final mile issue. And Matt, can you walk us through, sort of in terms of deployment, sort of what are the main issues that you see clients grappling with, and where do you see this, sort of the solutions around deployment moving over the next couple of years?
Great question. And this is, I think, having been there, in my prior life, running analytics teams at Goldman Sachs and seeing the pain that we've been talking about, what really struck me was the fact that all this pain that, Tim and Kieran and Alex have been talking about, where each organization was having to do this final mapping and mastering their own data sets over and over and over again, and had to be done in every organization, it would just boggle the mind. And one of the opportunities that we now have, and I'm happy to be helping make that happen, is by effectively allowing organizations to have their data in an interconnected cross-cloud, data network. The idea that data has to move to then be mapped into that mosaic goes away. And this, maybe they call it the last mile or the first mile, or the idea that data can now just stay in place and access data, so that when IX wants to provide data to a customer, when Morningstar wants to provide data to a customer, when FactSet wants to provide data to a customer, the customer can get access to that data without it having to be copied and reloaded onto the other side. right? So you can have true collaboration of data. And again, the cloud has enabled something to happen that couldn't have happened otherwise. That's really disruptive. You know, like when Kieran was saying 50 to 80%, I've heard 95%, even at places like Google, that's how much time is spent getting data into one place, getting it together, getting it the right format. It's crazy, right? And think about if we unleash that time off people's, off people's chests, and so they can actually focus on the next class of problem. Great, let's focus on mapping. Let's focus on actually plugging data into a model. Let's focus on getting value out of that data instead of all this mechanism that has to be repeated at every organization, however great the tools are, right? That goes away. And then lastly, things like concordance, where you can now have these, concordance as a service, or even enrichments as a service that can now be offered, again, on live data without movement, is this next class of disruption that's super exciting to see. And FactSet is one of our partners working on such a solution.
And Adrian, if I may, just a quick comment I wanted to make in terms of deployment, something that is very near and dear to my heart. Deployment, what I've seen, is incredibly sticky on the client side. And what I mean by that, it's like, as an example, Lehman Brothers went bankrupt in September of 2008. But Lehman Index franchise survived. It went to Barclays and then went to Bloomberg. However, I'm willing to bet a lot of money that there are countless of systems that still refer to Lehman Index as LEH ticker. And it's not because it's hard to find and replace, but because nobody knows the cottage factory of all the scripts and one-off dependencies that actually look and do specific things based on LEH. So every time it becomes a Y2K mini problem. So I think to the extent that we can help the industry to do conversions of that magnitude, in addition to just deploying of new data sets, will be helpful. I think adding new is relatively easy. Replacing old becomes really hard.
Yeah. Now, Kieran, great points, Alex. Kieran, I was just interested. You've obviously have open FactSet. You've also partnered with Snowflake. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the strategic thinking there in terms of the value that you're also adding there in solving that last mile problem or creating another solution for that last mile?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the way that we approached it was really from the standpoint of, how do we help clients? Clients kept coming to us and saying, Kieran, get me out of the data wrangling business, right? I get ultimately, on whether I'm buy side or sell side, I get paid for performance, not for wrangling data. So how can you help me with that? So, from our perspective, and where we had enormous demand from our clients with Snowflake, was it's quite frankly, my non-technical viewpoint is it's the easy button, right? It's I can now, prior to this, I could deliver data feeds, but that could take literally days and hours. And I've been on presentations where via Snowflake, I can enable the entire FactSet fundamentals database literally in minutes, if not seconds. I mean, it's that easy. So we then think about the next step in that is that linking. It is that putting it together, because it's not only our data, it's then linking it to the client's proprietary data, right? And so for the buy side, that's going to be in the form of portfolio holdings. On the sell side, it's going to be it's going to be ratings and research and things like that. And that's how we are, that's where we then think about our, we providing our concordance as an API, for example, and saying, here, take this and take this tool and use it internally.
Yeah, great. I'm going to turn my attention to, I recognize we're running a bit over time, but I just wanted to touch on two other topics before we finished here today. One topic is a little bit unusual, which is hyper-personalization. This isn't really a phrase that we use in B2B too much. If we think, about hyper-personalization of data in B2C, we all understand what it means. Matt, can you just talk a little bit about, how you think hyper-personalization of data on an enterprise scale is actually going to I think it's going to revolutionize everything we do in the workforce.
Yeah.
But can you give us your 2 cents?
I agree. I'm maybe the only one more bullish on this than you are. I think this is the next huge thing. The notion that data can be decoupled from applications and effectively have your data graph, both your first, second, and third-party data, be able to follow you from application to application in the B2B space, is really what this whole data cloud that we've been talking about enables, and it ties together what Kieran was saying of these services and applications that really can follow you. Imagine this: the same way you can connect your Spotify music to your mapping application in the consumer space, or to your running application in the consumer space. Right? I'm not copying my music into it, obviously. Right? It's just, I'm basically telling Waze that Waze is allowed to connect to my Spotify account, bring in those playlists, and then play music as I'm going on my way. Right? That same mechanism, that decoupling and recoupling, is what we're starting to see happen in the B2B space, where instead of having data that would be stuck behind these SaaS applications and I have to think about how am I going to get a feed and ETL it, or right, if I, Matt, could go into this app and say, okay, this app, it's connected to the data cloud, say, great, I want to enable this app to not only get my data out, but be able, to your point of personalization, to be able to bring my data in. I don't want to lose custody of my data. I don't even have rights to necessarily make copies of my third-party data, but if I can use that data within the context of this app, do my analysis, again, personalized for my purposes, and then take that with the new data that's come out of that analysis, and then bring it to my next tool when I'm, and have it follow me. This notion of personalization or hyper-personalization in this app space, again, could not have been possible unless we were on a connected data fabric. But now that we are, we're seeing massive disruption, and I think it's, in some ways, the next big thing.
So, Tim, I think, sort of Matt, sort of alluded to, I'm a big fan of this hyper-personalization of data concept. How do you think that the market data vendors themselves are actually going to evolve this changing requirement? Because this isn't how we normally think about pricing financial data.
Well, part of me hopes they won't evolve, to be honest. Look, I think the pricing models will evolve. Look, the first thing is I completely agree, Matt. I think that's the next shoe to drop. If I was sitting with my team, they'd be throwing things at me saying, "No, you're not the only one that's saying this thing." Look, a bit like what's going on in the cable business, right? We all pay $200 a month for our bundled cable offering. And at the end of the day, the technology is allowing us to unbundle. They're allowing us to basically take the content that we want and consume it and pay for it as we go. We might pay a subscription for that, a base subscription. We get some content. I'm thinking about Amazon Prime Video, for example, but you can also buy a movie if you want to. And the reality is that the way the industry has evolved, businesses have to buy the whole boat at the moment. They have to buy, to Kieran's point, the whole fundamental data set. They might only trade 100 stocks. So, I mean, our business model is very much predicated on choice. So we have a pretty remarkably low subscription, and you can consume across, through our API, over 140 endpoints. And obviously you can consume to a certain, measure of activity, and then you pay overages, a bit like your cell phone. You can also buy premium data and go pay as you go. And I think as I've joined IEX Cloud, it's really opened my eyes to the possibility of what that model could mean to the industry. We're very much more focused on the individual developer and the kind of the long tail. But we do think that there will be a shift in the way enterprises want to consume data. And I'm excited to watch that shift, over the next few years.
Fantastic. We're running out of time and I'm getting a TikToks in the background. So what I wanted to do is, Alex, you're sort of the last of us who have come over to the dark side in some respects, right? You left BlackRock, you're now at Morningstar, sort of, can you talk us through a little bit? There's clearly a lot of excitement from your perspective to make that shift. Can you walk us through why you've actually joined, and come on to the data vendor side? There's, what is the excitement? What do you see in the next couple of years of the market data vendor space?
Well, I think just the general value that businesses can drive from data assets and maximizing data assets in a way to combine them. So the story is really not from a specific data feed. The story is from the combination of multiple data feeds that actually tell the story. We're in the business of providing content, not in the business of providing data. And on the buy side, I've seen a persistent tension between getting data in fast and getting data in right. And fast doesn't necessarily mean right and vice versa. And there's always like what's more important. And in my view, you need to do both, meaning that you need to create a fast lane and you need to create a pristine lane. And knowing who needs that pristine lane where like tolerance for error is incredibly low. Like if you're rebalancing your portfolio based on some certain data, it has to be 100% right. You're putting like hundreds of millions of dollars on the line. If you're building data science models, as long as you're right more often than you're wrong, you're okay. And that's where I can actually use Fastlane. That's where velocity of this data is so critically. So from my perspective, and why I'm like excited to now be on this side is I have a very deep appreciation of what happens on the asset management side, what happens on the wealth advisory side, what makes people like portfolio managers and risk managers wake up in cold sweats every morning. And I hope I can do something to make them sleep a little bit better.
Great. So I really appreciate everyone's thoughts on the panel, and hopefully the crowds found this exceptionally exciting. I think, over the next couple of years, we're going to see a lot of innovation in this space. For those of you who are interested in having some follow-up discussion or Q&A, there's a link in the chat. So if you can all join us, and all the panelists will copy that down now, and we'll be there in about 1 minute. Thanks a lot for everyone's time.